Okay, we'll just wait until the numbers stabilise a bit and then we'll start. $18. Okay, 19. Okay, all right, we're at time and we've got quite a few attendees. So welcome everyone to the second of two webinars that are being hosted by a man called King. Last week we had Doug King talking about safety on the water. And so now that we're all very safe, it's time to get out there, well, virtually, because we can't do it for real at the moment. And we can, if we follow the exploits of the Russell King that we have tonight, we'll all do very well in life, I'm sure. He's done some fantastic things, and you'll see him when I stop talking. And if you see that same face, a very mild-mannered boat getting in and out of a boat called Tramp down at the club, just say hello, say well done. If we were doing this live, I'm sure there'd be a big round of applause when he starts. But otherwise, we'll just have to assume that you're all being very appreciative. Now, a little bit of housekeeping. There is down the bottom of your screen a button that says Q&A. So if you have any questions during it, can you push the button and type your Q&A, and then depending on how we're going, I'll alert Russell and he can answer the question, or we may have to leave it till later on. So we'll see how we go with that. And a big warm welcome to Russell King. You're clapping, and it's over to you, Russell. Thank you.
Thank you, Colin, and welcome to everybody. I've just been sort of recently reflecting on my sailing career, which sort of goes back to the 70s, 80s and 90s. So it's a bit of a ramble through my past, and I just thought it might be interesting to people. From a historic point of view, we fashioned up a bit of a title about tactical navigation, and that's what my forte was back in the day. But upon reflection, pretty well a 20-year-old with a waterproof iPad can pretty well do that all now by just looking onto the screen with routing software and weather models. They can do that all. So we might just leave that aside a little bit and just have a bit of a nostalgic travel through yesteryear. And I first started sailing dinghies when I was about 8 years old, and so it's 53 years ago, and graduated to the big boats in 1977. I still remember walking down Ferguson Street Pier and getting on Widgeon, skippered by John Bish, and that was the start of a passion or a love of sailing that went on for many years. And I remember when we got on board, he had a real rough bunch of crew. There was some sort of arrangement between the yacht club and the Williamstown Tech School, and Bishy had a core crew of 4 youngsters from the high school, and they were rough, but gee, they were good sailors even then, and they were only 15, 16 years old. And they were the core crew for a long time, and we did a lot of, back in those days, we had a lot of night races. And they went out of fashion some time ago, but they, in hindsight, they were very good at training young sailors in that they used to start on a Friday night, and they were sort of between 90 and 120 miles length. So we'd finish sometime on Saturday. The typical course would take us from Williamstown down to Fawkner Beacon, across to Carrambite, down to Mornington, across to Prince George's, and then back up through Spoil Ground, etc. So a big round loop of the bay. But what it did do is give us all a great amount of practice at sailing at night with sleep deprivation, and also great skills. It was great practice for navigators as well, because this was all predating GPS and sat navs, and so it was great to. It was a great way of honing the navigating skills. So we did a few of those, and I did my first ocean race in 1977, and I recall going out through the heads, and we had about a 20, 25 sort of sou'wester, and we started from Queenscliff in those days, and we're sort of staying high to the right as we're going out to heads, and we found ourselves in breakers. And, you know, they were probably 20 foot high, and there's, you know, they're actually breaking like surf waves. And there's about half a dozen of us all going through these breakers. And I'm thinking, gee, I thought I knew the heads was pretty bad place. I had no idea how bad it was. And thankfully, it was the first and last time I've seen breakers over there. But there were some lessons to be learnt there, and that is, don't go over Lonsdale Rock on an ebb tide into a 20 knot sou'wester. So, but we survived, and I think my fingerprints are still marked on the bulkhead there. I was hanging on so tight. The boat just went straight through the whitewater, and I recall looking out to weather and seeing a sort of 30-footer come off the top of the wave, and the whole boat, keel, and just suspended in midair for a second before it came crunching down on the other side. But we managed to make it out the heads and had a good race. So in 1978, Bishy, the same core crew with a couple of older blokes as well, a bit more experience, signed us up to do the Melbourne to Hobart. So in 1978, the young boys, and there was, I'll mention the names because there's a few familiar names to some people. There was Craig Jenner Black, Alex the Wog Salavonchek, Russell somebody who sort of fell away, but and Tim Dutton. And they were the core crew that, and myself, and they were the core crew Bishy had for many years. We did many thousands of miles together, and we're all good friends as a result. In fact, I got a call from, I know it's politically incorrect to call anybody WOG, but I got a phone call from the WOG just a couple of days ago just saying g'day. And, you know, the phone call goes, oh, Kingy, it's the WOG. G'day, WOG. So he's still going very well, and he's one of the best sailors I've ever sailed with. They all have gone on to great things and proven to be sort of some of the best yachtsmen in the area, certainly in Victoria. So the 78 Hobart, off we go, and funnily enough, it was a slow year for the Sydney Hobart fleet, so we actually beat the fleet in, and we were second across the line by a couple of minutes, and we as we're coming in, it was like a sunny lunchtime, and there was hundreds, if not a few thousand people at the docks, and as we pulled in, they all started to clap. And we're sort of looking over our shoulder, I wonder who they're clapping at. And sort of there's a realisation they're clapping at us. And of course, the learnings from all of this is that if you're going to take a crew full of teenagers to Hobart and with such a receptive crowd, they're going to run amok, which we did. So we had a great time. We're all hooked on ocean racing as a result. So just as we got more and more experienced, John entered us in the Sydney to Suva yacht race. And that's a bloody long way. That's 1,735 nautical miles from Sydney. And we recruited Graham Alexander, I think was then the Commodore of the club, and Ross Haraway, who's a master navigator of the time. And I'm talking, you know, celestial and astro navigation, because this again predates all forms of electronic navigation. And we had a meeting prior to heading off, and Graham and Ross assured us that it's champagne sailing all the way. We had 18 to 20 knot trade winds from the southeast, which makes just a beam reach. And they'd done it on a Model 33 2 years prior, which is a fair effort. And so Widgeon's a great reaching boat, so we had great expectations of getting there in maybe 10 or 11 days. As it turned out, it took us 16 days. 11 of those days were upwind sailing, and more than a week of gale force or above. So it was a very tough trip. I believe we almost, we were 200 miles north of New Zealand at one stage. We went so far east looking for the trades that never actually came. So it was a heck of a interesting experience. I wouldn't say good, because it was a very tough race. 2 years later, we did it again, and this time we found the trades out near Lord Howe and reached to an 11-day trip, so much better that time. And John Bish and I spent the next 3 months cruising around the islands, and it was a fantastic, eye-opening expedition for me, and so I have very fond memories of tropical islands, and we had a great 3 months. we advertised at the club to get some delivery crew to bring her back, and a couple of blokes have turned out to be my best friends ever since. And Les Erickson, John's dad, flew over, and we had a great, a lot of laughs all the way back. Poor old Les nicked his knee as he was climbing on. We stopped off at Port Vila at Vanuatu, and he scratched his knee as we were getting on the boat. And as we set off, his knee got bigger and bigger and bigger over the next sort of 10 days. And we got to Sydney, and they were talking about chopping his leg off. It was so badly infected. So, but he went to hospital, and antibiotics did work, so he kept his leg. And but it was a good trip back. So that was 82. I did my first Sydney Hobart in 1982 as well. But going back to the learnings of the long races, and as the learnings are that you've got to plan for the worst and hope for the best. And when it, we're expecting a 11-day trip that turns into 16, you've got to have the provisions, you've got the spare parts, and you've got to have the resilience to get through that 16 days. So first Sydney Hobart was 82. I lined up next year on a boat called Apollo 2, which was a Ben Lexon design, or Miller and Whitworth design, and very strong boat and a fast, it was a good boat to sail. We did a Hobart, and as we approached Tasman Island, which is the sort of second last rounding mark or mark of the course in the Sydney Hobart, I could see Lou Abrams through the gap between the island and the mainland. And so we put him about 4 or 5 miles ahead of us, and about sort of 40, 50 minutes in front. And he went on to win the race. And so we were sort of thinking we're going to do fairly well here. And we went up to, it was about 4 o'clock, we went around Tasman Island, and I learnt then that that the gate can close. The sea breeze will take you up to the Derwent, and anything after 4 o'clock, the breeze can crump, and you've got nothing. You sit in the river for the whole night. So Lou went on to win, and I think we were another 16 hours getting across the finish, and we were sort of parked a couple of 100 metres, I should say, from the finishing line, with no wind whatsoever, an adverse current coming down the river. And it wasn't until the next morning the sea breeze fills in, and you could see the sort of line of breeze coming up the Derwent. And on that line of breeze, there was about 10 or 12 boats all sitting on the edge of the breeze, coming up with it. And of course, by the time you get moving with the breeze, they've all gone past you. So it's just an exercise in absolute frustration. The learnings, of course, would be that you've got to leave a little bit in the tank for the Storm Bay and the Derwent, because you can make it or break it there. You can lose a race in the Derwent, or you can win a race in the Derwent. And on that occasion, we certainly lost. So Lou went on to win, and we were, I think, up in the 60s or something like that. So there's some valuable lessons to be learnt there. Another couple of lessons that I would reinforce later in my Sydney Hobart career, and that is, as you come around Tasman Island, you need to be right on it. You need to be a boat length or two off it. It's quite a big, sinister rock, and you get about a backwash there, but unless you're that 1 or 2 boat lengths off it, you'll be copping adverse current coming across from the Southern Ocean, sort of eastbound current that you'd be fighting. And if you tack off too far, you end up going backwards, especially in any breeze or if it's light. So you shave Tasman Island, and then up into the Derwent, you need to stay on the right-hand side, hard right. And we're talking as close as you're going to be on the right-hand shore going up, and then come across at John Garrow and then up to the finish line. So there's a couple of lessons I learned along with there. So that was 83. 84 Hobart was a very windy Hobart. An old cyclone came down from the northwest of Australia down into the Bight, came across and intensified off New South Wales in the hot water, and turned into an east coast low. So most Sydney Hobarts tend to be similar. As I think I said, I've done 10 of them over a 15-year period. And it's remarkable how many were similar in the weather. And typically you have a northeast sea breeze out of Sydney, which goes down the harbour. You beat out the harbour, and then around a mark of the course, then head out to a sea mark, reach out there and then hoist spinnakers and off you go until sometime that night a front will come through and you'll have a southerly gale to take you down the New South Wales coast. Your initial tactics coming out of the heads to get offshore into the current, because the East Australian coast current runs down the continental shelf roughly and up to sort of 2.5 knots. And so if you're in 2.5 knots at current, you're going to do very well towards the, against the rest of the fleet. So getting out to the current is important, but obviously you've got to watch your velocity made good and temper that temptation to get out to the current quickly with going away from where you want to go. So that race prior to starting, like all good yachties should do, is pull out your storm gear. So Christmas Day we took the boat out and put up the trysail and the storm jib, and on board was David Allen, who's a Williamstown sailmaker, quite a famous one, who was involved with the America's Cup and the Round World Race. He was on the bow and we were having a look at the storm jib. And just like a mechanic would kick the tyre of a car, he kicked the storm jib and said, yep, looks pretty good. And as he kicked it, his foot went straight through it. So, of course, Murphy's Law, 36 hours later, we're in 40 knots of breeze, struggling with a number 4 on a trysail. And I have never seen seas like that night. They were absolutely massive with no backs, because we had at least 2 knots of current going into a southerly gale. The waves were massive. They stood up. The wavelengths were ridiculously short, and you just could not, in that sail configuration, you could not slow down enough to prevent the leap off the top of the wave and the crunch at the bottom of the wave. It was extremely dangerous. We ended up coming off a wave, breaking every ring frame in the bow, and the diesel tank also moved or shifted, and we had diesel everywhere below, and we thought that's it, we're going to give it away. So we went back to Sydney, and we put the cruising sails on and turned around and headed back to Melbourne. And again, Murphy's Law, we've got no storm jib still, and we had gale after gale after gale. One of which we set off from Eden and halfway across the paddock in the oil rigs, and who should be coming the other way in 45 knots of breeze but Bob Lachlan on his round the world odyssey. One up, of course, and I do recall calling him up on the HF and see who's going. He said, I think he said something like, "Oh, the crew, we've got a bit of seasickness amongst the crew, but other than that, we're going okay." So we ended up turning back to Eden, and we had a few beers with Bob before he set off on that big circumnavigation. So that was early 85, and late 85 I lined up again with Apollo 2, and this time we had a very successful year. We had some new sails on the boat, and Ross Lloyd from North Sails and had taken over from John Bertram as the head of North Sails, and Ross had brought some new sails onto the boat, and we tuned the boat very well. We had a very successful winter series. I think we won it. I think we also did a Portland race, which we won. So as November was coming through, the boat was out getting all ready to go, and it was ready to leave. We used to leave around about the 10th, 11th of December for the delivery up. And the owner has said to me, "Oh, we're not going." And so we're all devastated. We had a really good crew. And he said, "I need a hip replacement, so the boat's not going anywhere." So I said, "Would you entertain the thought of us chartering the boat?" And he said, "Make me an offer." And we did. And we all put in, this 12-man crew, we all put in $300 and chartered Apollo 2 off the owner, and for $3,600, which is a lot of money in 1985, I might add. But yeah, so at the age of about 26, 27, I skipped Apollo 2 in the Sydney Hobart race, which is a sort of bit of a claim to fame. But it was a great race. We won a division. So yeah, great memories. One of the other learnings from that Hobart and other Hobarts is if you're going to do one, make sure you secure your delivery crew home, because on that occasion, 10 blokes all decided they needed to go back to Melbourne quickly. And what happens is it very physically taxing, the Sydney Hobart race. It's a very yeah, difficult race to do. And when you finish, you are absolutely knackered. And then, of course, you get stuck into the grog. And a couple of days of that, and you're dead. And the last thing you want to do is get on a boat and sail home. So my advice for anybody who's going to do one, make sure you secure your delivery crew home, make sure they're signed up. Because in that, I think that year we had 2 crew and 2 backpackers. We brought the boat back, and that's always not a good thing. And I know later in my sailing career, I did a lot of sailing with Lou Abrams, and Lou had the right idea. He would always have people for his delivery home. And Lou is a director of South Corp wines, which are, you know, all the good Penfold wines. Were in that stable, and on New Year's Day, he would go off and buy all this beautiful Tasmanian produce, and this truck would back up to the dock, and box after box after box of fine wine would be loaded on. And so the trip home was fantastic, because we'd have this beautiful food and fine wines, and he used to take us back to all those lovely little spots he's discovered from previous Hobart. So that's the other way to secure your crew. Just make it a fantastic trip home. So 85, 86 and 87, I think I did a Devonport with Bishy on that year. 87, I did Blue Max 2, and then 88 was a great year for me. And it was a great year for yachting too. It seemed, I know the stock market fell in 87, but it seemed that there was a lot of money still in the yachting fraternity, and it was a very robust, very healthy fleet of boats at that time. And I got aboard a boat called Once a Jolly Swagman, which was a Davidson 40-footer. It was a 1-tonner. So back in the day, 1-tonners, if you don't know, was the old IOR handicap system. A bit like 12 metres that aren't 12 metres in length. That's a formula. And 1-tonners were all about 40 feet long. And the boat was signed up to do, it was on the Australian team doing the Kenwood Cup. And again, Kenwood Cup started off as the Clipper Cup. It was sort of the Admiral's Cup of the Pacific Basin. So great fleets from Japan, the US, New Zealand and Australia. And of course, it was a great venue. You know, it was based in Waikiki, which is a holiday destination. It's beautiful sailing with 23 knots of breeze every day, and great racing. So I have very fond memories of that. And in fact, it was great being part of the Australian team. And the Australian team on that occasion, I think the number's 231 people. So that's a lot of team members, because we had, when I say team, there was 4 teams, Australia, white, red, blue and green, I think, by memory. Each had 4 boats. And then there was also a contingent of maxis doing the Maxi World Championships. When I say money, Rod Muir comes to mind back in those days. Rod Muir sold, I think he sold the Triple M radio network about just a year or so before. So he had so much money. And he bought Windward Passage, which is the old timber boat, beautiful old timber American maxi. He bought that, and then he commissioned Windward Passage 2, and he bought both boats because, you know, you got them both. You might as well bring them both to Hawaii to race, and a 40-foot high-speed tender as well. So he had the 3 boats there. The same regatta, I believe that there was a couple of maxis that are up in Newport, Rhode Island, that were wanting to get to Hawaii for the Kenwood Cup, and they didn't have enough time to sail on their own bottom. So they took the boats off their keels and stuck them in the Antonov cargo plane and flew them. The airfare was $500,000. So that's obviously nothing to somebody like that. And so we, as the Australian team, we were even chartering jets. We had chartered a Learjet to fly up to the Molokai course to check for current lines and wind shadows, and even on our day off, we did a practice race across the Molokai Channel, and the Molokai Channel is just to the east of the main island, and it's a pretty tough place. The wind funnels through there, so usually on the race course it's 22, 23 knots. Through the Molokai Channel it's 25 to 30 knots. The tide rushes through there, and the wave action gets pretty nasty as well. So on our day off, we did all the 1-tonners spaced themselves about 400 metres apart, and we just barrelled across there upwind, taking wind speed and direction readings all the way across. And the actual wind data didn't prove to be that valuable. Mind you, we identified a big knock as we closed the shore of Molokai, and which was useful. But certainly as we sailed back, and all the other crews had been on the grog all day, and so we've come back, and the wind data may not have helped us win the race, but certainly we psyched out the opposition. So it was worth doing. It was, but it was one of those things where it's just a matter of being completely prepared and having a professional crew who are all committed to the race. And that's why we ended up winning the Kenwood Cup, Australia did. So it was a great opening for my international racing. Back then also, so the mid-year, Hobson's Bay, I was working at Hobson's Bay as a yardman in those days, and not earning a lot of money, but Hobson's Bay put on us like a sportsman's night. And this is what we used to do, is that anybody in the Australian team, we'd have a night for them where we'd fundraise and put a few bucks in their pocket to go away with. And, I think it was a couple of $1,000 that the club raised. And, I'm still very grateful to Tony and Lynn Dawson and John Wilson, who I think just saw rejoin the club recently, and Jeff White. Lynn still hasn't forgiven Jeff for having a stripper there, but anyway, it was a great night, and a couple of $1,000 went in my pocket, and that gave me food and drink for the next 2 months. So the Kenwood Cup was a month, and then we went straight over to San Francisco afterwards and sailed the World One-Ton Championships, which was fantastic sailing. And San Francisco Bay is just an amazing place to sail. I could do another talk just on sailing in San Francisco Bay. It's a very dynamic place. And I was actually quite lucky to actually get there. We had a bit of a problem when we arrived, and we flew out of Melbourne. I stopped off at Sydney, and a whole heap of yachties jumped on, and this is the 231 Australian team. I think it's the biggest non-Olympic team at the time that has ever left our shores. So it was big. It was great fun to be part of it. And as we are going across, in those days you could smoke on a plane, and there's grogs. We were all having quite a few drinks, and it was just like being at the bar at the CYC on a Friday night. It was just full on, all these friends, and everybody's very excited. So we all have way too much to drink, and fell asleep around the equator, and then woke up landing in Honolulu. And I was travelling with Mel Hart, who's a boat builder from Mornington, and a great sailor, great bloke, a bit of an ocker, speaks with a bit of an ocker accent, but very talented tradesman. He built the Wild Things, he builds the pilot boats. So he's certainly a great shipwright, and we're travelling together. So we get off the plane and we're going through immigration, and they've grabbed us and taken us aside, and because on our declarations, Mel's got boat builder and I've got yacht club worker, and the reason for travel is for a yachting regatta. So of course they're absolutely paranoid about people working in their country without a green card. So off we go, and we find ourselves in this immigration detention centre. And and we're there for hours and hours. There's no air conditioning. I was wearing long sleeve and long pants, and it's hot and it's humid. I've got this dreadful hangover. And every time, and Mel's trying to convince me that the next stage will be a cavity search or there's something like that. And so every time I looked at him, he'd do this sort of hand in glove mime for the rest of the time we're in there. And you look around, and there was all these, this is overtly gay people. This was back in 1988. There was the Middle Eastern crew over there. There's the hippies over there, and then a couple of boat workers. So we're in there for 6 hours. And they pulled us up and interviewed us again. And this time they went into a bit of detail. And I was not well at all. And I'm thinking, this is not going at all well. And but we managed to convince them that we were there and we weren't going to work. And then I'm thinking, we're looking pretty good here. We're going to get through. And then they've gone through my bag and found a work reference from the Commodore. And my thoughts were that maybe I'd do a delivery back to Australia from America, and a work reference would be handy. But the whole dynamic changed, and they got quite nasty then. And I'm thinking, gee, we are on the borderline. We may be on the next plane back to Australia. Anyway, Mel's in the booth next to me, and he's doing much the same. And I hear Mel, and I'll quote him. He says to the immigration official, "You and your mates are a pack of fucking peanuts." And I thought, "Oh, Mel, what are you doing?" I'm thinking, that's it. We're on the next plane back. And the immigration official goes, "Excuse me?" And Mel says it again. He says it this time. He says, "You and your mates are a pack of fucking peanuts." And there's this pregnant pause, and I'm thinking, "Oh, that's it. We're goners." And next thing, the immigration official says, "Sir, I can't understand a word you're saying, but welcome to the United States. You're free to go." So that was a very funny anecdote. It wasn't funny at the time, I tell you, but it was great to get on our way and get there. So that was in 1988. We went on from a successful Kenwood Cup to the One Ton Cup, as I said, in San Francisco. Not so successful there, but we had a lot of fun there and did some great sailing. In 1990, went back to Kenwood Cup. This time I sailed with the Japanese. The Japanese guys had, they were an emerging fleet, very keen they were, and they didn't have the expertise. So Ross Lloyd from North Sails put together 5 guys from Australia, 5 guys from Japan, and it was a very big budget affair. They paid us really good money and accommodation and clothes and food and chauffeur-driven cars, and so we were treated like royalty. And again, we sailed very well. We had a brand new Far 40, and in those days, Southern Spars from New Zealand, who are pretty good spar makers these days, but in those days they were copying Sparcraft, they were the premier mast makers in England. And so we had some of these new masts from Southern Spars, and they just didn't quite work. So we ended up breaking one of them in the Kenwood Cup, and didn't have to do the round the island race. Just for those who don't know, the round of the island race, which is the last race of the Kenwood Cup, is literally around the whole island. So you start in an easterly direction up the Molokai Channel and bear away the top of Oahu, and then run all the way down to the bottom island, where you jibe around, and then you start your 300-mile work in 25 knots of breeze all the way up to the big island. And when you get off the big island, there's a wind shadow that goes, you had about 80 miles to get around the wind shadow by going offshore, or you can drift through absolutely windless 25 nautical miles through the wind shadow of the main island. So on previous occasion, we decided to go the short trip, but it's just the heat and the rain but it was very interesting because we had lavas coming down the side of the island, and we're quite close to where the lava is going in the water, and you can feel the heat coming off the water. So the ocean is actually getting hot, and of course, when you have this lava, river of lava coming down the side of a mountain, it generates its own sea breeze. So the air coming off the lava is so hot, it rises so quickly, it sucks in a sea breeze. So these lava flows had their own sea breezes, which we capitalise on, and then you get to the top of the island, and it's it's about a 200-mile run all the way back with a sleigh ride through the Molokai Channel where the wind increases and the seas get bigger. So, we didn't have to do that the second time with the Japanese fleet because we had the Japanese boat was the broken mast. We ended up going up to Japan later in that same year with the same boat, same crew, and we won the Japan Cup, which was not such a big deal here, but certainly was in Japan. So had some pretty fond memories. We were being chauffeur driven around in BMW M5s, and they were really pleased. I think the fall of the stock market around that time killed that golden goose, but I haven't heard from them since. But at least we did win a big regatta for them. So that was in 1990. In the early 90s, I started sailing with Lou Abrams on Ultimate Challenge. great bunch of guys, and Lou was a great manager of the boat. As he was getting pretty old in those days, but we did the 1994, the 50th Sydney Hobart together, and I think we finished 11th out of 350 boats, which was a pretty credible finish, especially for a boat that had a few years on it. He then sold that and got Challenge again, which is a Bashford House in 41, and we campaigned it for a number of years with another trip to Hawaii, a trip to Hamilton Island Race Week, and a couple of Hobarts as well. So yeah, when Lou passed away a few years ago, it's a very sad loss to a lot of guys who sailed with him and to the yachting fraternity as a whole. So he was a great participant and did some great sailing over the years. So that was the 90s, and pretty well I sort of got out of, got married and things changed a bit, the dynamic changed a bit, kids came along and really I had to give it all away. I ended up changing jobs. I joined the police force, and I've been there now 16 years, and but still managed to do the odd regatta. I did a Raja Muda series, which is a race up the west coast of Malaysia, which was fantastic. In fact, I've done it twice. Once was with a bloke by the name of Ray Roberts out of Sydney. He had a boat called Millennium up there, another Bashford House in 41, and we had some great sailing, and he's a very funny guy, and so lots of laughs. Did the Antigua Race Week on Helsel too. There was a crew from Royals who chartered Helsel too, and I was skipper or sailing master on that, and we finished second overall, which is a great result. Big flets over there and great sailing, and a real eye-opener as far as beautiful, the J boats and the mega yachts, and they're all there, so it was a bit of an eye-opener. A great time we had, finished second overall, which was not so much our great sailing skills, but my great negotiation skills with the Caribbean Handicap Per. So that held us in good stead, and so everybody had a great time. I did the America's Cup Jubilee with the 12 metres out of Royals. That was great fun too. I was the chase boat driver for that, which I was happy to be. And again, a great regatta with all the America's Cup boats from yesteryear there with Australia 2 and Kookaburra, and we took Kookaburra and Kiwi over and had some great racing over there in the solid off cows. So I did forget to mention in '89 I did a quarter-ton cup, which is the World Championships in Falmouth in England. That was a great experience as well. I recall back in '88 and '89 where we had success in the Sydney Hobart. I failed to mention that we actually won the race in '88 overall on a boat called Illusion. So that was a great experience. And over my shoulder there's a hue and pine sextant, and that was the prize back in 1988 for the navigator of the winning yacht. So that's one of my most cherished possessions. It's tumbled off the wall a couple of times. It's a bit damaged, but it's still a nice little reminder, nice little souvenir from the win. Both 88 and 89, one of the things that we did do was engage the services of a bloke called Roger Badham, Clouds, his nickname was, and he was a specialist meteorologist who was specialised in yacht racing. So he understood what sort of information you needed, and for $1,000 he would give you a package in the Sydney Hobart that would give you pretty well an hour by hour of what to expect as far as the wind goes. And so that was all part of how you win a Sydney Hobart, and that not only does the boat got to be right, you have to have a professional crew. And, my advice is if you're going to do a Sydney Hobart, they're great races, but be prepared that it's a very, very difficult race physically, and you don't get a lot of sleep. There's a lot of changing conditions, so you need crew that are resilient, fit. So don't take your father-in-law, don't take your boss, don't take some people. You need to have them who are good sailors, who are reliable sailors. If they get sick, they don't get bunk ridden. So there's too sick. Most people in fact get a bit crook. So that's okay, providing you still do your job. But if you're one of those guys who gets so crook that you end up in a bunk with a bucket, you don't want them taking up space on your yacht in Sydney Hobart. So have a great crew, prepare the boat well, get the weather forecast. Well, you can get it off the internet these days, but in those days, it was worth $1,000 to know what the weather was doing. And certainly tactics-wise, if you knew what the weather was doing, it was pretty easy. So we had that in the Sydney Hobart when we also took it with us by fax. We used to get a daily briefing from Clouds in England for the English Channel, and again, an hour by hour, what to expect up the coast, the southern coast of England, which also proved invaluable. So yeah, there's some memories there, and I hope you've enjoyed some of the old stories. And yeah, so I'm happy to go with any questions, Colin, if you.
Yes, Russell, we've had one question from Mark, which says, can you talk about the time when you were with the Port Phillip Sea Pilots?
No.
Oh, I'm presuming PPSP is that? So, no. Can Mark retype what that is? No. All it says is, so can you talk about the time when you were with PPSP? Oh, wrong King. That was last week.
That's it. Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah, same surname.
Right. Okay. The next question we've had is, how is John Bish these days? Haven't seen him about much.
John, I work in Williamstown night shift, do night shifts, and I finish work at 7 in the morning. I usually pop into the supermarket to get some food on the way home, and more often than not, I see John. He walks down from his house in Ferguson Street down to Coles in Willie, and he's still fit and he's still going well. I think he's well into his 90s now, so yeah, I see his boat's out of the water as well, so he's never say die.
No. No. Okay, do we have any more questions? Not looking like that. So,
sorry, I was just going to say, whilst we're talking of John, when I sort of reflect back, when I was an 18-year-old bloke walking down the pier, he not only changed my life, but guys like the Wog and Chinner and Tim Dutton had a huge influence on those guys. And he's been a mentor and provided those fantastic sailing opportunities to us all. And I take my hat off to him. He's a great bloke.
Okay, the screen's been catching up with us. So after that question, we had, hi Russ, from Rob Tanner.
Yes.
Yes. And then from Roy, what are your plans for sailing with Tramp?
That's a work in progress, Roy. I'd no idea. At this stage, especially in this lockdown stage, it's going to be. I find it difficult with my work to be able to schedule, having to be off at a certain time to coincide with, say, the Wednesday nights, for instance. So I'll just have to take it as it comes. I don't have any plans. I enjoy just going to work on the boat, potter around, and take it out on nice days. I'm not particularly interested in going offshore at this stage, but that may change when I'm sort of looking at retirement. Good question, though.
So once you get up to the rank of inspector, you'll be a certified carpet stroller and you'll be able to do what you like.
Yes, I'm not holding great hopes in that regard, Colin, but thanks for your ideas.
Okay. Now, Judd, put your thoughts on the current America's Cup boat.
I have no interest in the America's Cup boats at all. But technologically speaking, they are just amazing. And I do fear a little bit if we start looking at ocean racing and the advances that the America's Cup have brought to ocean racing, which is fantastic. But I do fear that we're going to have a major loss of a ocean racing boat. They are getting to the point that I can't understand engineering-wise how they can actually stay together, how they can actually, I often think about canting keels and jumping on. I say to people, if you stand on a ladder and put a brick in your hand and then cant it out 40 degrees and then jump off that ladder, your arm will move. And in a yacht with a keel canted out, it doesn't move. So the engineering, the loads involved coming off a huge wave with a big lead bulb hanging off the bottom of this keel, canted out 40 degrees, and then dropping off big waves. I just do not understand how they can stay together. And I do fear that the technology, and look, we've got carbon fibre, which is a fantastic building material, and that's allowed a lot of this technology, but I just wonder how it's going to go in the ocean. It's all well and good sailing in calm water, but I think if it does end up on ocean racing boats, and it's already on the single-hand around the world type races already with the foils and so forth, I do worry that we're going to have a major breakage and some loss of life. A bit pessimistic, I know, but I just can't see how you can put that sort of technology out in the ocean and expect it to stay together.
I'm not sure whether you've seen chat. I'll get back a couple of questions in a minute. I've got one from Tony Dawson. Hi, Russell. Great talk. You're will never forget. Cheers.
Sorry, Colin. I'm getting every second word there, so you're pretty garbled. Can we just try it again?
Okay. Yeah, internet connection's getting a bit dodgy, but it's from Tony Dawson.
Yep, got it.
And he's saying, "Hi, Russell. Great talk, and you are right. Lynn will never forgive Jeff."
Yes.
And next one is from Graham. I'm presuming Graham Kent. But a vacancy for inspector in my office, Russell.
we can exchange salty stories, Graham.
Yes. Roy, back to Q&A. Roy's got Sydney to Hobart 2021.
I don't think so. I think that my best years are behind me. So, look, I do enjoy watching it on the telly. The interactive internet stuff these days is great. And, I've still got a few mates that are doing it. Dave Allen, we started sailing on Apollo 2 in 1982 together. And I just marvel at him. He's just off on another, I think he's the boat captain on the old Voodoo, which is a Michael Pew 66, I think. And he amazes me. He's still as youthful and enthusiastic as ever, but I'm a bit older and wiser than he, I think. So I think my best years are behind me there. But look, I would love to have a drive of one of those big maxis. They just look fantastic. So and they power off. Those
unmute. I don't know how to. I can't turn on. All right.
Anyway, so I'm not holding my breath getting an invite to one of the maxis, but I think my best years behind me.
Hi, Russell. It's Rod here. Colin's dropped out.
Yep.
And I'll just quickly finish whether or not he can get back on board. But Rob Tanner's asked, what's been your favourite sailing venue? You mentioned Hawaii is one of them. What would be your favourite sailing venue?
Oh, yeah, I think so. I think Hawaii takes the cake. The good thing about the Kenwood Cup, not only is it a beautiful place to sail and good strong winds and fantastic scenery, going up the north on the Molokai race, you go up the north side of Molokai, which is just fantastic scenery. But also they used to have, and this is food for thought for future races or regattas that some of you may be involved with in the future. It's good to have great racing, but you need to also have a bit of, if you make it so the wives can come along and not feel, alienated by all the boys sitting around talking about boats. And in Hawaii, they used to have shopping tours, and they used to have like day tours. They used to have fashion shows. This is all sound a little bit sexist and stereotypical, but back in those days, the women really loved it. They used to come along, enjoy their time there, and which made for a great fun regatta. So yeah, I'd say Hawaii is probably the best.
Fantastic. Well, you've got lots of questions here. I might just mention I was laughing my head off because about Mal Hart, having worked at Wellington Yacht Club, and we had him as a guest speaker at one of our luncheons. Oh. And it was very funny to say. It was very funny how you've welcomed me back. Is I think my 21st was the last ever 21st ever held at Wellington Yacht Club.
Yeah, I might have been there actually. There's something about fire extinguishers or something. Fire hoses got lit off.
Yeah.
Or
Yes.
might have been.
Yeah, you were there. You were there, Russell. You were there.
No, very funny bloke. Great laughs, great memories.
And a very successful man. Just a quick, there's an anonymous person talking about the older days, right? And to great stories in the old days. And I'll just mention, Tony Johnston has mentioned, you know, you feel the golden era was in the 80s and around that time. And you think we can get back to something like that within sailing? We've talked about technology and things. Do you think where sailing is still on the right track?
I honestly think that it's linked to your economy. And when your economy is bubbling along and people have got lots of money and cash to throw around, sailing is very healthy, because the bottom line is we're talking about international ocean racing more so than just sailing. It's an expensive sport, and to win at it, you need to be able to throw a fair bit of money. And that is a good thing in some ways, in that guys who spend all their whole lives captains of industry earning their money, it's a great way to spend it. But it really requires a very healthy, robust economy, and that gets reflected into the type of yachts and the fleet sizes. And back in the 80s, we had the Admiral's Cup trials were probably the best sailing you would do. And I did a couple of them, and I think it was 85 and 87, I think. Huge fleets of brand new boats, and people were putting millions of dollars into the technology, and
the trials just on the bay, is that what
they were on the bay,
yeah.
But boats from all over Australia would turn up, and Hitchhiker and come over from I still remember it coming over on its own trailer with its own had a bus with it all sign written the same as the boat, and it was a very professional team. I was spending a lot of money on it in those days.
Does that lead on to Festival of Sails? I've got I know I'm just running out of time because we've got an hour, but David Judge mentioned just any stories from Geelong Festival of Sails, and I presume that Geelong Festival of Sails was as big as any sailing during the 80s as well.
Yeah, absolutely. That's been a major event that's endured the years. It still is a great event. I haven't done it for a while, but it's a great regatta.
Fantastic. And Rod Fuller's written here, what's your favourite boat during these years of ocean racing?
I did. That's a good question. I sailed on a Volvo 60 just for a week or so. I don't know when it was. They are great boats, and because I've always enjoyed the ocean racing side, sailing on a boat that was incredibly strong, incredibly fast, and robust. You could take it. Literally, you could, and in fact, it had already been sailed around the Cape Horn, dodging icebergs, and they were great boats. Still are great boats. They're all getting a bit old.
I would have thought you would have said an SNS 34. Yeah.
Well, they are great boats too, and the SNS 34s have probably the most successful. Not only have they ferried the most number of single-handed yachts persons around the world. They have probably won more races than any other class. If you go back in the days, and there's still what's that thing called that keeps doing the Sydney Hobarts? The navy blue one from Sydney. I can't remember its name, but it got a third last year, and I know Greg Finch at Cinnamon. He got an 8th in the Sydney Hobart many years ago. They are great boats, and because they are so seaworthy, and all the successive handicap systems have all been designed to enhance safety or encourage safety. That's why they always come out very well, because they are such good seaworthy boats.
Would the blue boat be called Komatsu Azuru?
Yes, that's it. Komatsu Azura, yeah.
Well done, Paul.
Yes, well done.
Yeah.
It's a bit of a senior's lapse there.
Yeah, there is one last question before we wrap it all up, and it's probably a good one to feature for the future. Helen Kermey's come in to say, any suggestions on getting young people involved in sailing today, post-COVID? Any suggestions of how we can encourage the youth to go sailing?
Yeah, it's a pretty good question. I don't know, Helen. going back to the tri-sailing days is one way. Maybe if we did more of them, or had the next stage. So had I'm just thinking on my feet here. Yeah, I've done the last couple of tri-sailing days and find people love it. They're enthused by it, but maybe we have something post that where we can get them onto certain vessels for a Wednesday night and get them involved that way. I've had a fair bit of correspondence with Australian Sailing in the last 12 months about this, where you have to be a member to race, and I know it's a contentious issue, but I think it's all supply and demand. You know, we are sailing boats, we need crew. A bit different in Sydney, where a lot of these people come up with these ideas where there's more people wanting to sail than there are boats. But I think it's imperative that you get people hooked, get them involved, and then stick your hand out for membership. But anyway, this is my opinion. Going back to Helen's question, yeah, if we just maybe tailor the program where take them out for a day sailing, and then get them involved, and see if we can get them involved in a Wednesday night race, and then go from there. So
fantastic. Well, Russell, it's nearly 8 o'clock. I think it's even hard to talk for 10 minutes, but you've talked for a long period of time.
I've waffled.
No, you haven't waffled at all. You kept everyone's attention. I'm really pleased. This is recorded and we'll be able to listen to it again. It's a great history, and it's a really good memory of a person that's done so much sailing.